Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Coffee and Conversations with ISP. Now, before we begin, I'd like to remind you that the duration of today's event is approximately 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer period. During the presentation, be sure to add your questions and/or vote for other people's questions on the Pigeonhole platform. Go to www.pigeonhole.at and type in the code ISP Digital. We won't have time for all the questions, so be sure to vote, and we will be sure to read the questions with the most votes. Lisbeth, my colleague, will read the most voted upon questions during the Q&A. Now, I would like to remind you that this presentation will be recorded and available to our wider community afterwards. You will be receiving an email with a link to access the video. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our Director of Technology, Mr. Bill Hatcher. Bill has been an educator for 13 years. He has a bachelor and a master's degree in special education from the University of Maryland and earned his technology integration certification from Boise State University. Prior to joining ISP last year, Bill served as the Educational Technology Coordinator at Magen David Academy. Since joining ISP, Bill has headed the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Certificate Program and served as the High School Technology Coach. Bill was appointed earlier this year to the position of Director of Technology at ISP to help build and guide ISP's online learning program. Bill is the father of a future ISP student and husband to an ISP elementary school Spanish teacher. He cares deeply about the role of technology in education and our society, and he's really excited about the information he's going to be sharing with you today. Thank you, Bill, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Vicki. First, I want to say thank you to everyone for attending, and I really look forward to giving you this talk. It's my first webinar, so it's a little awkward talking to myself on a screen, but I know you're all out there listening. You can see on the screen in front of you a picture of my beautiful daughter. She's 2 years old, and let me jump through this one. Okay, so I want you to go back to the video that we just played, and I want you to think about how you felt watching that video. Were you scared? Were you angry? Were you curious, frustrated? Were you like, that's my kid? Because really all your emotions and all your feelings about technology, they're all valid. We don't know exactly the effects of technology on our kids. We don't know the effects of technology on ourselves. We don't know the effects of technology on the world. It's constantly changing. And the best we can do is try to be mindful of technology and the role it plays in our society and with our kids, and just to reflect on that regularly. So I hope during this talk, we'll be able to discuss some of the strategies and skills and mindsets you should have with regards to technology. You're going to see maybe more imagery or discussion about slightly older children, maybe middle school age, high school, simply because there's a lot more information about that. There's not too much information yet about technology on really younger children, but younger children will become older children. So we will, let's just keep that in mind. But hopefully all these tips and tricks are relevant to everyone that's come and joined us today. So, like I said, my daughter is 2. This is not my daughter, but I thought these were funny. It's amazing what technology, how our students are able to just interact with this technology. So my daughter is 2, and I don't know how she did it, but she can find little baby bum videos on YouTube on my phone. I never taught her how to do that. And so we think about this, the role of technology, and we think, oh, our kids are so smart. And really what we need to understand is that technology has adapted to us. right? So the device that you hold in your hand is adapted to you. So it's so easy to use. It's so fluid to use for a child because it's been iterated over and over and over again, from the size of the icons to the placement to the colors. And that has allowed what these little guys are doing to be so easily done. So it's really an amazing time to be alive. It's amazing what these kids can do with technology, but let's just be mindful of the role it plays, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. So I used these resources to build most of this information from the talk. The top two there, Common Sense Media and the Family Online Safety Institute, are the bulk of where I got the bulk of my information. And the Center for Humane Technology and the American Academy of Pediatrics provide some evidence and some other resources. Common Sense Media is a very prevalent organization that focuses on the well-being of families and schools and students with media. And many schools use their digital citizenship curriculum. We do as well at ISP. The Family Online Safety Institute is an organization focused on the family, and they produced a workshop called 7 Tips for Good Digital Parenting. And I'm going to share those with you during this presentation. And so when you see a slide and there's some information on there, I did my best to tag it with one of these images or logos so that you can go back and you can see if you're interested. Okay, so let's get started, shall we? All right. So I assume you're in this webinar because you have a child, or because you're an educator and you're interested in children and the role technology plays on them. So I thought that these statistics were interesting. The average age for a child to get a social networking account is 11. Now, granted, this data comes out of the US. Most data related to technology at this point does. But the average age is 11. In actuality, it's only legal to be 13 years old and above to have a social media account. So it's interesting that the average age is 11. And if you look on the left side there, you'll see the apps that are most prevalent for kids between the ages of 13 and 17. And if you look at those top 3, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, I would say that constitutes the bulk of the time that students spend engaging in social media and digital consumption. So I want you to think about that idea that the average age is 11, and that surprised me, but it should maybe comfort you a bit if you feel that your 11-year-old has social media. Here's a few more statistics. 29% of teens physically sleep with their device. A third of kids sleep with their device. 36% of teens regularly wake up to check their device. So the statistics there were interesting. 36% of the kids wake up to check their device, not just because they get a notification, but some kids are just becoming habitually waking up to see what's going on their phone. 39% of teens report they spend just the right amount of time on their devices. 39%. So the inverse of that is 61% do not report that. So whether or not that is they feel they don't use their devices enough or they use it too much, I'm not sure, but that number is fairly low, I think. 47% of girls and 32% of boys report spending too much time on their devices. So there you go, 47% of girls. So half the girls that were surveyed feel they spend too much time on their devices. And 58% of the children say they are distracted by their device at least once a day. So that should give you some pretty good insight in how the vast majority of our students feel that technology really plays a pretty prominent role in their life if they're waking up just to check it. I hope we're not all doing that. Sleep's important. All right, so it leads me to the question of, are they addicted? So if 47% of girls feel that they spend too much time on their device, are they addicted? And that's a very tricky question to answer. Teens check their devices frequently because they feel pressure from their peer groups to check their devices. So is responding to an outside pressure addiction? I don't know. So addiction, by definition, requires that you need more and more to feel pleasure. Sorry, my screen's just a little. And that you're unable to cut down if you want to. So how do you balance the effects of this outside pressure that comes in from our students and from their peer groups, and now their school, right, when we're all online? How do you balance the outside pressure of being connected with a student maybe feeling like, I want to cut down? And does that, if they can't cut down because of outside pressure, does that mean they're addicted? Really, what we're probably seeing more of than anything more than addiction is anxiety related to being connected. So FOMO is kind of a common term now in our society. Lots of people use it in finance, right? Miss the big stock, but fear of missing out, FOMO, fear of missing out. And the idea is, we are so connected, we understand, we are able to know what's going on in all of our friends' lives. We fear that we're going to miss out on that feeling. So back before phones, if you didn't get invited to the party, you might not even know that party existed or happened. Or whatever, I don't care, I didn't get invited to the party, but you weren't being bombarded with imagery on your phone from all of these different friends that are at that party. Or maybe you were invited, but you can't go because you're grounded, right? So kids get this anxiety to check their phone to see what's going on. And they go and they check their phone and they feel slightly better. And then they, and then they have to go back again, because there's this constant cycle of anxiety about what's going on their phones. And this is really important for us to remember. So although they might not meet any clinical definition of addiction, there's definitely an anxiety in our students' lives related to being connected with friends and having constant connectivity. So why is it their fault that they're anxious? Is it their fault that they keep going back to their phones? And in my research, in my opinion, I really want to say it's not. And the reason I want to say that is because our apps on our phones are designed to keep us hooked. So after iteration over iteration over iteration over iteration of a design of an application or a program, they've got just endless amounts of feedback of what we want. And so one of those things that you'll notice is infinite scrolling, right? How hard is it to stop when there's no end, right? How hard would it be for a 13-year-old who's got all his Instagram followers and his friends, just maybe there's something cool in the next one. Maybe there's something cool in the next one, and it never ends. That's really hard for a kid to manage. It's really hard for a kid to walk off and say, I'm done looking now, okay? And even as a grown-up, it's hard. Even as, you know, educators love Twitter. I don't know if parents know that, but we love Twitter because we can share things all over the world. But there's just endless stuff. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that person's neat. I'm going to follow that person. And it never stops. So I want you to think about this idea of just there not being an ending. Also, there's in Snapchat, there's this idea of streaks. So a streak is when a kid has to continuously post in order to kind of earn points, right? So this is ingenious design on the part of Snapchat. How do we keep getting kids back? Well, let's incentivize them with emojis and points, right? And they'll keep coming back because they want to keep those streaks going. Okay. When all of these technology companies went public and they started selling stocks, they needed to figure out, you know, once I have the app, what else is there for me to buy, right? So the way they're going to make money to pay their stockholders is they need people on the devices. So they've designed these ways to keep people engaged on their devices. Those are two options. And then notification dots, those little red bloop dots that pop up there's countless amounts of research about the effects that those little dots have on your psyche, and the placement of them and the color of them and the size of them, and just how intriguing they are to the eye, and they just almost force you to want to click that app. So one big piece of advice you could give your kids is to turn off notifications, okay? Because notifications wake you up at night, they distract you, right? You go on your phone because you need to chat your mother, but a YouTube notification pops up and you're curious about what that is, and now you're stuck in YouTube, the endless, infinite world of YouTube. So turning off notifications is a really big trick that you can use to limit being sucked in to technology or to media that you hadn't planned on going to. Okay, so what do we know for sure? This is from Common Sense Media. This is a big study that they did. It's online, and I'll send you the link after this session. You'll get a follow-up email with links to all of these resources. So what do we know for sure? How much kids use social media determines their happiness levels. And now, well, what, good or bad, high or low? It's funny. Kids that use social media a lot, or too much, if you will, report being less happy. But students that use it very little also report being less happy. So there's kind of this sweet spot that they call this moderate amount of social media use. And what they define moderate as, it's a balanced approach to their lives, where social media and technology plays a part of the kid's life, but it is not their entire life, okay? So if they're having fun times with friends and family, if they're pursuing outside interests, if they're staying healthy, if they're getting enough sleep, if they're doing okay at school, then they're probably in balance. But if they're at home all day and they're constantly scrolling and they're just overly invested into their social media lives, there's a lot of evidence that proves that those students are probably going to be less happy. Now, we could say maybe that kids who are unhappy or depressed go into social media as an escape. So correlation versus causation is not 100% clear, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that if you look at the metric of how much usage, people that use it a lot tend to have more unhappy or depressive characteristics. So what they're doing online matters. So we're in the middle one there. So teens who use social media passively or only to get likes and follows have the most negative outcomes. So think about the idea of passive social media use versus active social media use. Okay, so if you have a very balanced kid and they're active on social media because they're chatting with friends and they're learning things and they're interacting and they're sharing their lives, that's active use. They're actively engaged. Passive use is when they can get sucked into just the dreaded consumption side of social media. And it is proven in a study by Facebook that passive use also correlates more with depressive symptoms. So there's a lot of factors that might influence these things one way or the other. Kids who are unhappier overall have more negative outcomes using social media than kids who are happier offline. Lack of sleep is often overlooked. But ultimately, if social media is making your kid unhappy, okay, then that's probably enough evidence to intervene. If you notice that your social media is making your student not, or your child not the child you know they are, then maybe it is time to kind of look at that and think about that. So the big idea on this slide is active use versus passive use. How are your students using, how are your kids using social media? Are they actively engaged, or are they just passively consuming what's going on? Okay, I wanted to talk a bit about gaming. Gaming is much more prevalent with boys, but there are girls that game, and it is becoming a very big part of the lives of our children. A study by the American Psychological Association found that video games help with problem solving and creativity. They help develop spatial recognition. They help make kids more resilient. So there's a lot of that goes on in video gaming that's positive. I mean, if you look at these games and you watch these games, the skills and the communication skills and the strategies are amazing. And I got a chat here. Okay. And it's very important that we take that into consideration. But what looks like, sometimes may look like addictive behavior, really isn't addictive behavior. Okay, so our students might be super engaged because this is amazing, the strategy involved to get to the, not even the next level, but to win or to interact with their peers is incredibly engaging, okay? And there's often no end point in these games. You know, when I grew up playing Super Mario Brothers, there was a level, you beat the level and it was over. But a lot of these games like Minecraft or these first-person shooter games, there's just no ending. It can just go on forever. And just like the infinite scrolling, it's difficult for kids to know when to stop. And super engaged behavior, when you're trying to remove someone that from something that they're super engaged in, could mimic kind of addictive behavior. So if you think of the analogy of a kid who loves basketball, right? He's outside every day and he's shooting hoops, you know, and it's all he does, and he carries his basketball around. And when he's playing the game, if he loses, he gets mad, and if he wins, he's excited. And if you tell him he can't play the game, he gets mad, he gets angry at you. We don't call that addictive behavior. That's just a kid who's passionate about basketball. But we live in a digital world now, and Minecraft's the new basketball, right? So there are behaviors that kids exhibit that reflect how passionate they are about it. That doesn't necessarily mean they're addictive. However, video game addiction can exist. Now it's slim. It's about 1% to 9%, but that's a pretty big range, but it's really difficult to kind of identify exactly what video game addiction is. But really, video game addiction, if just like any addiction, if the behavior is causing problems in the child's life, then you should probably intervene. So if, just like balanced social media use, if your child can manage their video games, manage their friendships, manage their classwork, and manage their family life, then their video gaming is probably okay. It might even be beneficial for some kids. But if they can't do that, if it's obsessive, it's everything, and it's causing issues, then that might be time for you as a parent to intervene with your kid. There's a website called Game Quitters, gamequitters.com. You can see the logo there. And that website gives a lot of resources about video game addiction and strategies and resources for parents to kind of understand what kids are going through. And it might be worth a look if you feel your child can't quite handle their gaming. Okay, so I'm going to take a short breather, and I have a question for you. So, what concerns you more as a parent? The amount of time your child spends online, or what your child is doing online? So you should see a poll pop up. Oh, I think I can answer it. Okay. Oh, I can't answer it. Okay. So I'll give you guys a minute there. So what concerns you more? What your child does, or how many? Lisbeth, I can see the question. So I think at some point you will turn it off, and then we can, I'll see the results. So what concerns you more as a parent? Okay, I'm getting feedback here. It says that 55% feel that it's the amount of time they spend on the device, and 49% of what the child is doing on the device. Okay, so we're split pretty down the middle here. Let's show you what a study from the Family Online Safety Institute came up with. So they found that 64% of parents care more about what their children are doing online over how much they spend online. Now, I'm going to say something. I think this was taken before we were all in a pandemic stuck in our houses. Okay, I think screen time has become much more of an issue. And if we re-polled it, I think we might get more of a split, just like we did as part of our ISP community here. So originally 64%, I think that's interesting because I think we are connected. I mean, there's theories out there to say that our children now are almost constantly connected. From, if they have an iWatch, if they go to school and they log in on their Chromebook, and then they come home and they have their cell phone and they go online, and then they play a video game and then watch Netflix, and then they go to bed. I mean, there's very little time there where they're not connected to the internet. So if we kind of, for the sake of argument, assume kids will always be connected, then we might want to consider more about what are they doing online while they're connected. Okay, that doesn't mean endless screen time is good. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it is a bit hard to manage screen time right now because of the situation we're in. So I understand why that's definitely a concern about everyone. Okay, so if we move forward, so I'm going to talk to you about 7 tips to help be a good digital parent. These come from the Family Online Safety Institute, and I found them to be fairly clear, and I thought I would share them with you. First and most important thing that you can do with your children is talk to them. Do not panic. Do not stress out with them. Just talk to them. Be direct and open with them, but talk to them. Having a conversation, and this doesn't necessarily mean you just sit the kid down once and talk to them. This means this is a constant facet of our lives where we're constantly talking to them about what they're doing online. The Center for Humane Technology thinks that you should ask the right questions, right? So maybe just like, instead of saying, do you like this game? Ask them, how does this game make you feel, right? If you say, how does this game make you feel to a kid about Minecraft, they might say, makes me feel creative, makes me feel like I'm an explorer, right? And that's very different than, yeah, I like it, it's fun, right? So how does it make you feel? I think is a really good way to talk to kids about their use of technology. So you could use that for everything. How does Instagram make you feel? Right? Oh, did you see what your friend put up online? How did that make you feel? Right? Start that conversation there with feelings. Educate yourself. Search online for anything you don't understand. Try out apps and games. So it is your responsibility as a parent in the 21st century to educate yourself about what's going on online. There's a lot of resources, and like I said, I'm going to share them with you. But really, the best thing you can do is just learn about it. As much as you can, try to understand what the app is or what the video game is, because the more you understand it, one, you might be able to make a better decision about whether or not your child should be using it, but it also might help relieve some of your anxiety. If you really don't know what Minecraft is and you just think it's some silly game, if you really get into what Minecraft is, it's an amazing platform where kids can do all sorts of amazing things. And the more you know that, then maybe the less anxiety you'll have as a parent. But you'll also be able to have a better conversation with your kid the more you know about the app. Use parental controls. So there are all sorts of parental controls that you can use. I'm going to jump over here to the next slide. So I made this and I put this together for you because there's a few ways that you can use parental controls. So the first two icons are, the first one is screen time on iPhones, and the other one, I believe, from Android is called time well spent, and they're essentially just trackers that tell you how much you're using particular apps, and you can even set time limits. And just being mindful of the amount of time you spend online or in a particular app can be beneficial. You might think, oh, I'm only on there an hour a day, but then after a week you realize you're averaging 4 hours a day on Instagram. That's mindful. That helps you understand, and that helps kids understand how much time they're spending. You might not know, but there's parental controls on all the video gaming systems. You can actually go in and set, choose which games your kids are allowed to play, and you can set time limits, all sorts of things. In the resources, there's a link to an organization that helps you manage that. Open DNS. So this is a bit technical, but there's a way when you go on a website like facebook.com, that message goes through a system called the DNS, the domain name server, and it looks up, it's like a phone book for the internet essentially, but you can choose which DNS you use. Most of us just default to a DNS that's provided by Cable Onda or whomever our internet provider is, but you can use Google's DNS, or you can use all other sorts of DNSs. And OpenDNS is a popular one because what that does is that edits your phone book. So if a kid puts in a website that is not appropriate, the DNS won't return anything to the computer because it's basically saying we've flagged that website as an inappropriate website. And it's essentially, it's almost an impenetrable way for you to help limit the, I'm sorry, I need to plug in my computer. So that's a bit technical, but know that exists. And also within routers, you can limit things. You can set up parental controls within routers. You can turn off, so you could set your kid's iPhone so that it's only allowed to connect certain hours of the day. So there's lots of different options. That being said, there is an argument to say that we really shouldn't be filtering our kids, right? So I just flipped it on you. But because given the prevalence of all of this technology in our society, we really maybe should be teaching our kids and having open and honest conversations with them about how to navigate it rather than just blocking it or spying on them. Now, I believe a balanced approach is appropriate here. I think it's perfectly acceptable to filter your internet at home, to put parental controls, but I think you should be mindful of the idea that maybe just a forceful big brother, big mother approach to locking down your internet might not be the best approach, because surveillance and privacy are becoming very important things in our society, and do you want to mimic that in your home? But that might be too philosophical for you, and you're perfectly comfortable, and that is totally your right. It's everyone's right to do that. I just want you to maybe think about that as you start to implement different methods in your home. Number 4 is set ground rules and enforce consequences. Remember, you're still a parent. I know it can feel, like I said, my 2-year-old, it's amazing, right? And you almost feel helpless with this. So it's important to understand that you're still a parent. You can take the device away. You can enforce consequences. It's hard to do that sometimes, but really you got to remember that. And there's ways to do that. You could negotiate a contract with your child about what the expected uses looks like in your home. So just remember that you can enforce rules. It's not just about acquiescing to them. Another strategy is to follow your kids on social media. Kids don't necessarily like this, but I think it's important. I agree with this. It helps give you an understanding of what they're doing, but it also helps them understand that mom and dad are watching a little bit. And it's important though, don't stalk them. You know, if you're following your child on social media, don't comment on everything. Don't, I love you, boo-boo. You know, give them their space, but you might want to consider following your child if you don't follow your child already. Another big thing, explore, share, and celebrate. Have fun. Technology's cool. Like, we all use it. Engage in technology with your kid. Play video games with them. Watch Netflix with them. You know, show them what's on your internet, your Instagram feed. Engage with them. You know, make them understand that it's part of your life too, and that you're interested in their digital life. You know, be a partner. Don't be a prison warden. Be a partner with them. Learn from them. Have them learn from you. Engaging with your kid, I guarantee, I can't wait to be able to watch, you know, movies with my daughter and stuff. She's too crazy now to do that, but I think it's really important. And finally, I'm going to jump to some statistics. So 39% of children feel their parents spend too much time on their devices. 45% of parents report feeling addicted to their device, which is higher than kids. Maybe we're a bit more mindful because we remember a time not having devices. And 23% of parents report arguing with their child about a device at least once a day. So this brings us to our final point, which is to be a good digital role model. Your kids are watching you. Someone said once in a conference I was at, don't worry about when your kids are online, worry about when you're online around your kids, because they're watching you. And if you tell your child to put down their phone while the phone is in your hand, you know, that's a mixed message. If you're like this picture and everyone at the table is scrolling on their phone during dinner, you know, that's telling kids it's okay. So if you feel that your kid is on their phone too much, reflect back and think, am I on my phone too much? So that was the 7 tips for good digital parenting. I think they're something that can give us a good prompt to reflect on what's going on in our homes and how and our behavior as adults. You'll get those in the email that will be sent out. We talked a lot about screen time, so I did want to share this briefly. And this is from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it's in reference to the lockdown, the quarantine that the whole world is in. And for years, we've been saying, limit screen time, limit screen time, limit screen time. And now we're all locked in and we're like, are you going to school? Are you sitting on your computer? You know, and then you want to talk to grandma? Well, here's the cell phone. How should we feel about that? And the answer is, it's gonna increase. Screen time is gonna increase. It's increased for everyone. And try to give your child the opportunity to use their connections for good, right? So have them, make sure they're talking with friends, make sure they're connecting, make sure they're doing their homework, make sure the content they're using is quality content, and use social media together. We're gonna increase our time there, okay? And my last point before we get to some questions, these are just my points. Don't blame your kids. This is the world we created for them. They just live in it. Don't blame them. You know, worry about them, sure, but don't act like it's their fault. And finally, educate yourself, because this is not going away, okay? So do your best as a parent, understand your role as a parent, and I hope that was helpful, and I think we have some questions now.
And before we do that, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Bill. That was super informative. And, you know, I was riveted with all of the statistics you just showed, and it is just so relevant at this particular time. So I'm really glad that you prepared this for all of us. I also want to say a huge thank you to our parents who've been avidly posting some questions that we're about to hear. Please vote on each other's questions so we make sure we get the most important ones to go to the top. And if for some reason we don't get through them all today, we'll post the answers next week's In the Dolphin Dispatch. So Lisbeth, you're going to share with us the most voted on questions.
I can't hear you, Lisbeth.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Great.
Thank you. Once again, Bill, this was amazing, very eye-opening. We do have 3 questions from the most voted questions from our audience. The first one being, what is ISP doing to bring awareness to our children with regards to the risks of social media and internet in general?
Sure. So ISP is committed to teaching, in education, we call it digital citizenship, right? It's about being a positive member of a digital society and what that looks like. And so the organization that I referenced a few times in the talk is called Common Sense Media, and they have a curriculum to help guide teachers in teaching kids about these risks, you know, about the good and the bad of social media and technology. In high school, for the quarantine and online learning, we've started a Friday advisory lesson on digital topics. We're kind of focused on kind of real world issues. In last Friday, this is every Friday for about from 8 to 8:30 in advisory. Last Friday, we talked about how to have civil online discourse and what that looks like and why it's difficult to communicate online. Our younger children, this has been taught in class and in homerooms regularly. So we do use that. We're definitely going to next year really look at increasing this level of digital citizenship skill teaching, simply because this quarantine was such a wake-up call to everyone, and this is definitely a high priority for ISP.
Thank you, Bill. Another question for our audience is from Tatiana, and she asked, is TikTok a risky app, and what age is appropriate for having an account?
Okay, this was actually sent earlier on Pigeonhole, so I prepared a slide. Okay, so TikTok. TikTok is really interesting. And why is it interesting? So Common Sense Media gives TikTok a rating of 15 plus. So they recommend that you should be about 15 to have a TikTok account. Just looking at the videos online, that's probably not the case. Lots of younger kids have TikTok. But what makes TikTok a bit concerning is how easily accessible it is for younger kids to view what one might consider more mature content. So TikTok works just like every other social media by the amount of followers you have. And while it's very easy to get followers if you are doing more mature content or more riskier content. So it really is a balance between, you know, what's the maturity level of your child, because there is a 13 and under TikTok, but it really just gives them access to TikTok videos, but it doesn't allow for the social or the sharing component of TikTok. And it apparently hasn't been very big of a hit. It's also really easy to just make an account on TikTok. So it's easy for kids to get around that. And also there's some privacy concerns with TikTok. Like for example, you can't delete your account. You have to submit and ask for a submission to delete your account. So really, I think TikTok is more about, just like every other social media, if a kid's on there, you know, they can easily find content that's probably not appropriate. I think TikTok's just very appealing because of the videos and the dancing. So on the surface level, it's really, really cool. There's just this community within TikTok that might not be appropriate for younger eyes. So if your child is on TikTok, I highly suggest you talk with them a lot about it. You watch it with them, you look at what they're looking at, you see who they're following, and you engage in those conversations with them, because it's just kind of a big open world, and you're not 100% sure where your kid might go in that situation. So it's kind of up to you, but if you want a statistic or you want some evidence, Common Sense Media says it's probably appropriate for about sophomore in high school. It's kind of the age range they put it at.
Thank you, Bill. Our third most voted question is, should we modify the screen time for our kids during quarantine? They have online classes and they also want to play video games and connect with their friends. So now at home, they doubled the screen time.
It's a really good question. So I think I kind of touched on that a bit with the slide from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Really, you're going to have to use your best judgment, right? We have to have kids online so that they can go to school. We have to have kids online so that they can talk to grandma and grandpa and their friends. And it's really important that they do that. It's really important that they maintain social connections. So I think the best bet you can have is stressing that what they're doing on their screen time is quality content, that they're actively engaging, they're learning, they're talking to friends, they're talking to family members. Go back to that active versus passive. Are they actively engaged and connecting, or are they just passively consuming? You know, maybe we want to pay attention to the passive consumption and kind of let the active take over a bit more. It's really hard. My screen time's gone through the roof. You know, everyone's has. So just balance that. You know, active versus passive. Think about that.
Thank you, Bill. We still have time for a few more questions. And the next one is, parent modeling of good behavior is way more difficult now with kids around the house all day and parents work depending on screen time. Any tips on how to deal with this?
I've thought a lot about this actually, and I think just one tip that you could do is to schedule a time during the day when your family's together and no one's on a device. People call them device-free dinners. And I mean, you could say device-free coloring time. I'm not sure how you want to phrase that for you there, but find a time when you're all together and there's no screens, and start there, and use that time to talk to your kids, and use that time to connect as a family. Because really, it's going to be really difficult to just keep up with our responsibilities as students and as employees, and have a family lives, right? So we've all found that. So find some time where you're all off devices and share some time together. That's my advice there.
Thank you, Bill. So our last question is, what age is suggested to start following social media use?
Okay, so most social media applications require a child to be 13. That's generally because the law in the US says that, and most of these companies are based in the US. 13 is kind of that age of consent for social media. I think that if you are a parent and you follow the 7 tips for good digital parenting, and you're engaged with your kid and you know what your kid is doing, then social media is okay around that age. If you don't feel your child can handle it, then you might want to wait till they're a bit more mature. I don't know that there's a perfect age. Every kid is different. You want to look out for kids who are what they call digital status seekers, right? So they just want those likes, because there's this idea that self-confidence comes from knowing who you are. But if you're just obsessed with your image on social media, then your self-image and your self-confidence can be delayed, because you kind of have these two competing personalities out there in the world. So I'd suggest that you think about your child. There's no right answer. But if you need a legal argument, 13 years old works there.
Thank you so much, Bill, for sharing all of your knowledge with us. That was just fantastic. Super, super informative, super relevant, and just very important for all of us as parents and teachers, and all of us who are engaging in social media and being online. As you said, our numbers are going through the roof as human beings, and just trying to strike that balance. So thank you so much. I also want to thank all of our parents. We have had a large number of parents joining us today, and I really appreciate the questions you've been asking and your high engagement level that you've stayed with us throughout the session. That was absolutely fantastic. If you're left with questions, please do not hesitate to contact us via ISP Communications at isp.edu.pa, and we will forward those questions to Bill. Any questions, if there are questions on Pigeonhole that we did not answer, we will make sure that you get the answers in writing in the next week's Dolphin Dispatch. And we'll also share this video recording with you, the Zoom recording, so that you can share it with other people and other parents for whom this is relevant. Just a general reminder, next week is Pink Shirt Day on May 4th, so expecting lots of people dressed in pink. And later in the week, we're going to have Phil Boyd from Breaking Down the Walls joining us. Many of you will remember Phil from last year and the year before. And he is going to talk with us about our mindset and how to choose to look at a problem or a situation from a positive and productive angle. He will look at the difference between being resilient and relentless. and how we choose to focus the 100 plus conversations each of us have every day. That webinar will also be on Thursday the 7th at 1:30, and you're going to find more information on our website, www.isp.edu.pa. And at this point, I just want to thank you so much for being with us today, and have a wonderful long weekend. And we look forward to seeing you on Monday for Pink Shirt Day. Thank you so much for being here.